party members have come over the last, well, this is day 11 now, discussing the important issues about how we can tackle climate change and how human-made carbon footprints can be mitigated against. And there have been tough negotiations. The first week we saw countries like Canada retract from positions it held in the past, and we saw other countries in the developing world offer their solutions to the equation. Issues around the Green Climate Fund have been coming up. So a lot of discussions have been taking place, but the question that's being asked is, what is Durban finally going to give the world? This conference is indeed coming to the 11th hour. It's due to end tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And questions are already being raised whether that deadline is going to be met. It's also, as I said, the 11th day of the conference, and these negotiators still hard at work and working through the night, sometimes burning that 11th hour candle to try and come up with an agreement. In a short while I'm going to be talking to Tasneem Essop, who's an international advocate for climate change strategies, and she'll give us a state of play of where we're at the moment as we go into the final days. What have we agreed or not agreed to? What progress has been made or lack of progress, and perhaps what might likely come out. We'll also be joined by the Minister of Trade in South Africa, Mr. Rob Davies, and he's going to be telling us a little bit more about how energy is used in this country. But we're also going to be hearing from our colleagues who are scattered around this venue with different issues all around climate change, though. And one of them is Blaine Herman, who's been occupying the people space at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Good morning to you, Blaine.
Morning, Peter. Here live from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Well, today we're talking climate refugees, and in particular, the UN estimates that around 150 million people could become vulnerable to climate change in terms of the refugee status by mid-century. So important issues indeed. We're talking to a Kenyan activist that's actually working on the ground and working around these issues. That and much more coming up in the next few minutes or so. But first, let's check in with Noma.
Thank you, Blaine. Well, we are coming live to you from the exhibition center, and later on we'll be joined by two people from the Global Alliance of Indigenous People, and they'll be telling us more about the moratorium that they are calling for here at this conference. We'll also be talking to a young journalist all the way from Nigeria. She'll be sharing with us more just what covering COP17 has been like. But for now, let's go back to Peter.
Thank you very much indeed. And well, you're starting to hear a lot of noise around here. If you do hear anything, don't be disturbed. There have been all kinds of, I wouldn't even call them demonstrations. I think people voicing their concerns in the most creative ways that they can. In fact, yesterday we had some young Canadians that were ejected from a plenary session because they stood up in the middle of their environment minister's speech, wearing t-shirts saying you're forgetting about Canada, and so they were pulled out and they were decredited straight away. So they're hanging around outside of the system now, but they're quite embarrassed with the stance that Canada has taken, particularly over their tar sands project. So that's kind of the vibe around the COP17, the negotiations that are taking place inside. I think as we get into the last few days now, the last hours, it's been quite tense in terms of trying to reach an agreement. To help us unpack how the process has gone, I'm now joined by Tasneem Essop, who's a climate change strategist with WWF. Thank you very much for joining us, Tasneem.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, we've spoken a couple of times now. At the beginning, there was a little bit of optimism. End of week one, expected, slowly moving forwards. But now we're at the 11th hour, aren't we? How do you assess where we're at now?
Well, it's still in that process, and the process is slow. What we have now is in the negotiators negotiating and continuing to negotiate on some key elements. But as you know, the ministers have come in. And a number of these issues are being elevated for the ministers to resolve. One of the concerns we would have is that a lot of these issues are being elevated for the ministers' attention. They're going to have to resolve quite a lot, so their table is getting packed. But the negotiators are also at the same time in parallel trying to reach agreements on a number of areas. But to be quite honest, there are very little agreements emerging. And so, again, the big key that we're waiting to unlock all of these other issues is the issue of the legal form. I mean, what is the future of the Kyoto Protocol? Will developed countries take a second commitment period? And what are developing countries and all those who are not in the Kyoto Protocol willing to put on the table? That is the key to unlock everything here. And it is crunch time. And we are worried that they're leaving this for very late. And so they need to get into gear now.
All right. I mean, as you say, there's a deadline now. They've kind of been putting it off for the last two COP sessions, but they can't do that anymore because Kyoto ends in a few months' time. But I've seen a hardening of positions as well by some of these countries. Is it likely that by tomorrow evening or early Saturday morning we're going to have something? You know, I'm sure they don't want to walk away empty-handed.
No, of course. I mean, there are lots of there is an understanding that you can't leave COP South Africa and Africa empty-handed. So they're needing to make that happen. There's been a lot of hardening of lines, but that's typically part of a negotiation process. But there's also been a whole number of political engagements, quite bilaterals, facilitating some kind of form of agreement behind the scenes around this issue. So we're hoping that there's results out of those political engagements as well. This is a political issue, and it's correct that the ministers now have to step in and try and resolve it. The presidency is also involved, of course, to try and reach some kind of agreements and facilitating that. But certainly that is the key element. We need movement on that to be able to see movement on the other elements like adaptation. These matters are simple issues, but they're being held up because this other issue is again not resolved.
So what are the best case scenarios that you can see? What is likely to happen that most people can live with?
Well, I think for environmental organizations, especially those who really want to see the results in terms of emission reductions so that we can prevent dangerous climate change, we would want to see a very solid architecture in the agreement that will ramp up ambition. So, for example, the issue of addressing what we call the gigaton gap, what is needed in terms of the science, those issues have to be addressed, or at least a process that will bring clarity about how many gigatons still need to be addressed and reduced. And that is the element of a very strong ambition target, also on finance. Clearly, it seems as if on the finance issue we might not come out with very certain ideas of how finances will be mobilized. We'll get a green climate fund in all likelihood, but we wouldn't know where the money is going to come from. And if there's an agreement around a process for that year, that's also, look, and to be honest, Peter, this is like really low levels of ambition that we're talking about, but this is probably the best thing that you can see emerging out of this.
All right, Tasneem, always a pleasure talking to you. We're going to leave it there for the time being, and let's see what happens in the next 24 hours.
Let's see. It's going to be a long 24 hours. The 6 p.m. deadline is too ambitious.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. That was Tasneem Issa from WWF, climate change strategist with the organization, sharing her thoughts about the negotiations so far, and clearly a lot needs still to be done within a very few hours that are left. All right, now during the course of this week we've been speaking to key people who have a stake in the negotiations that are taking place. This is a UN-based conversation, the COP17, and the man at the top of this is Ban Ki-moon, and our very own Blaine Herman had an opportunity to talk to Ban Ki-moon, and this is how their conversation went.
Mr. Ban Ki-moon, economic, social and environmental concerns are often inseparable. How important is sustainable development in this day and age?
International community has been dealing with many global challenges, climate change. In UNFCCC, we have been suffering from a food crisis, a nutrition crisis, water shortages, and energy shortages. And many people have been dying from preventable diseases. These are all interconnected problems. Therefore, if we are able to address the climate change or energy issues, then we'll be able to address most of the crisis altogether. That is why we are promoting to achieve sustainable development. Sustainable development will be top priority of the United Nations for coming many years.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon there speaking to Blaine Herman a little bit earlier. So that's the kind of position that he's taken. He's hoping that the nations, even if something legal isn't signed during this particular session, that at least that the leaders and the negotiators will find some kind of common ground that will take us forward in the coming months. And I think most people are hoping that Kyoto will get some kind of an extension, or at least the principles of Kyoto are embraced by all nations and the obligations that they had signed up to. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and after that we're going to be exploring how South Africa has been tracking its energy use. Welcome back. We're at the Albert Luthuli International Convention Center, and a lot of negotiations, as we keep on saying, have been taking place. 194 parties coming together for over 2 weeks, trying to thrash out some intricate detail of a way forward. And as you can imagine, that has certainly been quite difficult for most nations. But we have seen the European Union stepping forward and pushing harder for negotiators to at least extend the agreement, the Kyoto Protocol agreement.
So far, but we just have to say, when others, and that was our hope in Copenhagen, that was our hope last year in Cancun, that is our hope here in Durban, that others would come to the table and say, of course, we understand the urgency, so we are also committing now. They have unfortunately been extremely clear that they are not going to do that in Durban. Nonetheless, we have said, but we are ready to do so. But we then say, one thing is that you are not ready now. That we cannot have that you can even not commit for later. You do not have to be extremely specific what you commit.
That was Connie Hedegaard, the Commissioner for Climate Action at the EU. Well, there appears to be some positive movement also in the direction of the what shape the Green Climate Fund will take. Rich countries have pledged up to 100 billion rand by the year 2020 to aid poor states directly affected by the effects of rising temperatures and climate change conditions. The US was positive about it, but didn't really go into detail. In fact, they were quite cautious about where the money was going to be coming from.
In terms of the notion of the so-called not having an empty shell, of course there shouldn't be an empty shell, but I don't think most donor countries, I'm not sure if there will be any donor countries who are prepared to put money in yet, since there isn't quite any place to put it in yet.
Todd Stern there, US negotiator, and in fact the United States and Canada in particular have been singled out as perhaps being some of the nations that are holding things back. In fact, America was saying that they only really commit to negotiating terms for an agreement for the next 9 years, 9 to 10 years. So not much optimism about their changing their position. Let's join another one of our colleagues now. Namawetu, where are you?
Good morning, Peter, and welcome back to the exhibition center. Well, a convoy of buses traveled all the way from Nairobi to Durban, and this was through Tanzania, Zambia, and Botswana. Amongst the people traveling on those buses were 5 young journalists. One of those journalists, Tina Ogbina, joins us now to tell us more about her journey. Good morning, Tina, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Just how was your trip from Nigeria to Durban?
From Nigeria, I left on the 3rd and I got into Kenya. And from Kenya, we left on the 7th. From Kenya, that's Nairobi, down to Tanzania. From Tanzania to Malawi, Malawi to Zambia, Zambia to Botswana, Botswana to South Africa.
And just what is your experience like being on that trip down here to South Africa?
It's a lifetime experience I can't forget, because I saw firsthand the effect of climate change. You understand, when you are being told, Africa is affected by climate change, you just think it's a kind of, it's a slogan. But right there on that trip, I saw effects. I saw deforestation. I saw streams dried up. I saw farmlands devastated. I saw poverty. I saw children that their parents could not farm again. And when we come out from our trucks, they beg us for food. We saw women that have to change their birth pattern, their child spacing, because when you have lots of kids, you can't feed them because the farms are gone. We saw lots of Maasai people now migrating to urban cities. Why? Because the cattle, they have no grazing land. We saw those things, and it's not being told, but the reality.
But coming here to COP17, there's so much going on. How do you then suss out what to cover and what to leave out?
The first thing I saw some things and I had the focus. For example, in Malawi, there was this aspect of deforestation where trees are being cut down. And I said, fine, I'm going to follow up on this. I'm going to ask their delegate, what are you doing? Why do you have to privatize your forest? And what is the effect on the economy and the people? Those are the things I worked on and I'm still working on. I also looked at in my country, there are some places where there's shoreline erosion and people are affected. And right here, I'm working with the small islands, asking them questions to how in your country, how are you people being affected? What are you doing? And how do the people have to adapt to this?
You spoke about your country and how it's been affected by climate change. Just go into detail about this.
In Nigeria, for example, in Lagos, on the 10th of July, there was a flood that led to the death of close to 100 people. So in the history, or let me say for a long time, we've not had that kind of rainfall. The rain lasted for like 14 hours at a stretch, and there was serious devastation. For me, that was a kind of excessive rainfall that we've never seen. And also in some parts of some cities, some towns that are close to the beach, we have this place they call Okwafa, close to Lekki Beach. As I'm talking to you right now, I'm sure it's gone, because I've been following up on it since July, and of October I went there. The Atlantic Ocean is coming closer to the people. And for me, I just hope this COP, I just hope the leaders will do something. They should not think it's not affecting. It's affecting people. They could be comfortable in their house. But you know what? When this devastation comes, it does not know black, white, rich or poor. It comes to everybody. So right here, I just pray that by the end of tomorrow, they'll be able to do something. For example, commit to Kyoto Protocol, the second commitment to it, so that some countries, some people can have a life. They could be comfortable, but they should think of people that are not comfortable. That's why it's on me.
Thank you very much for your time. Well, that was Tina Ogbina. She is from Nigeria. She traveled all the way to Durban by bus, and she says it's an experience that she can never forget, and she hopes that this COP can bring solutions to the people of Africa. Back to you, Peter.
Nomawethu, thank you very much indeed. That's indeed quite a fascinating story to be able to travel all the way from West Africa down here to go through the continent. And I think what better way to see just how climate change is affecting the entire continent and not just the pockets of areas that we are all sitting in. So it is a collective effort. In South Africa, well, the country is doing its bit to try and change the thinking about how we use energy to more efficient ways, renewable ways. In fact, yesterday the South African government issued a statement saying that they were making progress on one of its projects, initiatives around energy saving, and to tell us what they're doing and why they're feeling that it's getting a little bit better. I'm now joined by the Minister of Trade and Industry, Dr. Rob Davis. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Peter.
So what initiatives has South Africa undertaken to try and change our thinking and do things greener and better?
Well, I think the first point I'd make is that we see that the transition to a low carbon economy, it can be either an obligation or it can be an opportunity. It can be a cost that's imposed on business and economic activity, or it can be an opportunity for us to move our industrialization development efforts further forward. And we've taken the second choice, and we're trying to be proactive. One of the projects which we launched last night together with a number of international partners was something called the South African Renewables Initiative. And here the decision has been taken that we will procure 42% of the new energy needs from renewable sources by 2030, which is about nearly 19 gigawatts of energy. And the importance of this choice is we've done it on a scale large enough to support industrial development. And we've been saying that it's very important that the new wave of industrial development, which is green technologies, Africa and South Africa benefits from this, not as just service providers to somebody else's products, but actually as manufacturers ourselves. So we've chosen to go to this scale. So I think that's the first one. We've had to proactively seek out international partners, because our ability to do this does depend on us mitigating the additional costs of this investment on electricity prices. And so we were signing agreements with a number of international partners. The other side of it is that we have a project which is industrial energy efficiency. It's a project also which we've been working with international partners and with the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. At the moment in South Africa it's at a fairly pilot stage, but there's a standard which is called ISO 50001, and this is basically about taking steps to ensure that you reduce your energy consumption in business. And the figures and the experience of other countries are really quite stark. I mean, for a start, about 40% of CO2 emissions do come from industry, and the savings in terms of CO2 emissions that can be made by just energy efficiency are actually quite stark, and it does help the bottom line. And if
are companies buying into this? Because you've mentioned the bottom line, and an accountant just sits there and he says, cost of sale, and they'll say, I have to put in new things, new way of thinking. Are they buying into it?
Well, I think that this is in South Africa still very much, as I said, at a pilot stage, but we have been running training courses and programs, and I think those that are embracing this are finding that this is something which is very, very worthwhile. And we are in an economy where we are paying more for our energy, and it is a cost item for a number of businesses, small as well as large businesses. And by conforming to that standard, also you'll be putting yourself in a good position to show yourself internationally that you're doing your bit. And this may count in terms of international partnerships, trade relations, and things of that sort. So we are trying to encourage companies to become much more energy efficient.
All right, Minister Rob Davies, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the program.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So those are the initiatives that the South African government has been working with to try and move our economy into green, and also to change the thinking of a lot of the industrials who are responsible for a good part of the carbon emissions that we see in the country. And the Energy Efficiency Project is one such initiative that they've been using as a vehicle to try and change that thinking in company workplaces. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then soon after that there'll be more from COP17 here at the Albert Luthuli International Convention Center. Welcome back. We're still at the ICC, and I've got to say today is a little bit overcast, and I just wonder if this isn't an omen of the kinds of things that have been happening here. When we started COP17, there were torrential rains, and I remember driving at the lower part of town, and the water came up to the door of my car. And I think as we come to the end of this conference, it looks like we're probably going to have a sizable amount of rain as well, almost as if to remind the delegates here that they're discussing very important issues that need to be addressed. On the sidelines, of course, there have been a lot of people voicing their concerns about what's happening inside these walls. And Blaine Herman is at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he's been monitoring those thoughts. Blaine?
Yeah, Peter, when you look at it, some of the figures that we're getting are pretty much shocking. In terms of that estimate I was telling you about from the United Nations, it was reported that 150 million people could be at risk of becoming environmental refugees by the middle of the century due to climate change. Let's test that stat right now. We're joined by Wahoo Kara. She's from the Kenyan Debt Relief Network, and she joins me now. She's done a bit of work in that regard. Wahoo, thank you very much indeed for coming through and joining us. Do you agree with that stat? Is it that dire on the ground?
Well, I do agree, because the issue of climate refugee is a reality, because the allocation of resources has continued to dispossess more people and more people. So we have had a history of political refugees, economic refugees, and now climate refugees. But the whole question is the question of how do we access resources, how do we distribute those resources? And majority of the people are dispossessed, and that is the question. So the question of running away from reality with the climate refugees is to rethink what kind of frameworks economically do we want to put in place so that each and every person lives a dignified life. And that is the question. It's not just about talking about statistics and climate justice and climate change, because climate doesn't change. It's our economic activities that make these changes.
I know activists always have questions, but they do have some of their own solutions. What are some of these solutions for this?
The solution is that to be honorable enough and to be responsible enough to think through alternatives that are going to work, economics that is going to work, economics that is not steered by the interest of greed and profit, but economics that accesses livelihoods to people in dignity and in honor. And that is the question, because the whole question is systemic question. And we don't want climate change, we want system change. And this has been stated in Copenhagen. This is what I'm affirming now. And ordinary people have alternatives. We do adapt and mitigate out of this dispossession and dislocation. And we have alternatives. And I want to tell people at the ICC, whatever outcome they come with, it is not a representation of the people of the world. It's the representation and the interest of business, and business as usual goes on. They want to commodify our own lives. They want even to sell air to us. But the question is, are people of the world ready to accept that? I am saying we are not ready.
Well, strong feelings indeed. Wahoo, we've got technically about a day and a half so of talks left. How do you think it's going, watching from the sidelines?
Well, the talks have been there since Rio and World Summit Sustainable Plus 10, and now we are going to Rio Plus 20. There has not been any solution. It has only been the interest of the market, and now the corporations have taken over with the debates of carbon trading and clean, green work or energy, whatever they are calling them. But I am saying the resources of the world are not such enormous that they are infinite. We have to be sensible, responsible, and steward natural resources that are compatible with the needs of life, but not the greed of life. That is the bottom line. And that discussion has not been put at table at the ICC. The discussion is to exploit more and more and more, extend the greed, profit making. But that is going to put everybody into danger. So those men and women at the ICC, they must hear loud and clear that we cannot allow them to plunge the world to disaster. We are doing something.
Just very briefly, what's happening in Kenya at the moment with regards to climate change?
Well, disasters like everywhere is happening in Kenya. We have big, long times of drought or too much rain with no order to conserve the water. Many poor people are dispossessed. Many poor people are being told to mitigate and adapt. But I'm saying even the infrastructure to help people to mitigate and adapt are not there. So it's that recklessness and carelessness of the policy makers that we are making a wake-up call that life is important and life is not going to be sacrificed at the altar of profit.
There you go, a very passionate activist indeed from Kenya's Debt Relief Network, Wahu Kara there. Peter.
Blaine, thank you very much indeed. It's great to hear all these voices, in fact passionate voices, about the struggles that we're facing across the continent. And I think that negotiators here should be mindful actually that they're not negotiating on behalf of governments, but actually ultimately they're negotiating on behalf of real people on the ground. Let's join another real person, and that's Namawetu. She's at the exhibition area.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome back to the Exhibition Center. We're now joined by Bernice Sanchez as well as Tom Goldtooth, and they are part of the Global Alliance of Indigenous Peoples. They'll be telling us more about what the moratorium is calling for here at this conference. Let's start with you, Tom. Just start us through, what is the Indigenous Peoples Global Alliance all about?
Well, this Global Alliance of Indigenous Peoples and local communities against REDD, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, and also for life. We come together here at this COP17, and the indigenous peoples are very concerned that if we don't have binding and guaranteed safeguards around not only the protection and recognition of our indigenous rights and tenureship, but also legal and policy reform to around our forested land. But now we have this big, large, complex systems called REDD Plus now that expands out to agriculture, to look at soil and carbon in the soil. It's a property right issue. It's privatization and commodification. It's a new form of colonialism. And that's something that indigenous peoples know about, and the people of Africa must really seriously ask questions. We don't have answers. We ask these questions, and they say just keep on supporting REDD. Don't ask questions. We're going to work it out at the end of the day, but the risks are so high. This can become one of the largest land grabs in this world's history.
Tom, you speak a lot about how this REDD and now REDD Plus has affected you. What is this REDD? Explain it briefly.
Basically, this REDD is a mechanism using money, various forms of market system, carbon trading, carbon offset, private investment that will pay countries in developing countries money not to cut their trees. Indigenous peoples here from forested areas are demanding that their trees be protected, but not under these smokes and mirrors that could end up being the largest land grab. It's about property rights. It allows polluting corporations like Shell and other oil companies where I come from North America, where they're expanding oil production. But what gives them a cover to look good on paper as far as them being able to offset their carbon is that they say we're investing in the trees in the global south where the carbon credits are cheaper. But people have to ask, where is this money coming from? These people are buying our forests all over the world. It's about privatization, not about protection of the land tenureship and forest rights of people.
Let's just talk to Bernice just a little bit. Bernice has a translator here with us. Just, Bernice, briefly, how, with all the discussions that have been going on here at COP17, do you think that REDD will be taken away and people can live better where you come from?
¿Se va a implementar una moratoria contra REDD?
Eso es lo que estamos exigiendo como pueblos indígenas. Nosotros estamos sumamente preocupados porque los países no están adquiriendo compromisos vinculantes de reducción de emisiones en los países industrializados, pero tampoco están comprometidos con el futuro de la humanidad y menos aún con el respeto de los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Es por eso que nosotros estamos exigiendo esa moratoria. Sin embargo, hace falta voluntad política para hacer caso de esta moratoria. Hace falta que ustedes como medios de comunicación estén reforzando constantemente esta petición de moratoria. Eso es para nosotros muy, muy importante porque implica violación a nuestros derechos como pueblos indígenas.
Let's just go to Cassandra so she can translate that for us a bit.
Yes, indigenous peoples of the world are demanding a moratorium against REDD because there is no binding emissions reductions. They're not going to cut their pollution. They just want to use REDD as a mask for their inaction. And they're not working to save the future of humanity. They're undermining it, and at the same time they're violating the rights of indigenous peoples. This is why we're demanding an immediate moratorium against this forest scam, this carbon offset scam called REDD. There is no political will here to stop REDD, but we're demanding it nonetheless, and the media has a really important role to play to tell the people of the world that we don't want false solutions to climate change, and that the ones that they're implementing like REDD are violating the rights of our peoples.
Bernice, I hear that you've got a lot of demands here with your moratorium. There's been word that the Kyoto Protocol might just die here in Durban. Do you have hope?
No tengo esperanza ninguna en que los países industrializados firmen un segundo periodo de compromisos bajo el protocolo de Kioto. Los países industrializados, la única preocupación que tienen es de continuar con sus mercados de emisiones, con sus modelos de producción insostenibles, perjudiciales para toda la humanidad, y no están adquiriendo ningún compromiso vinculante de reducción de emisiones. Los países industrializados lo único que están buscando bajo el protocolo de Kioto o bajo un segundo periodo de compromisos no vinculantes es únicamente reforzar un mecanismo de colonialismo para los pueblos indígenas. Lo único que están buscando es reforzar las decisiones acerca de REDD para entonces utilizar a nuestros territorios como esponjas que están absorbiendo las emisiones de carbono de estos países industrializados.
We'll have to cut you there, Bernice. We've run out of time. Well, that was Bernice and Tom Goldhuth, who form part of the Global Alliance of Indigenous People, telling us more how this COP should bring solutions and not false solutions. For now, let's go to an ad break. We're back after this.
Welcome back. You're watching the special broadcasts that have been coming to you daily on SABC3, covering the very crucial climate change talks taking place at the Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre here in South Africa's East Coast, Durban. Now, the Oxfam, the World Organization, has warned COP17 delegates that increasing frequent and severe extreme weather events, they're pretty much compounding the impacts of climate change on crop yields, on food prices, and this would lead to more food shortages around the world if nothing is done. We're probably going to see price hikes as well that we've been seeing certainly steadily in the last couple of years. We've seen those price rises hiking and destabilize markets around the world as well. This is if nothing is done. Millions of people are in crisis, and Blaine Herman had an opportunity to speak to Rashmi Mistry from Oxfam South Africa about these issues.
Well, Aid and Development Organization Oxfam believes climate change is a global problem that needs a global solution. Rashmi Mistry is from Oxfam SA, and she joins me now to find out some of these solutions. Rashmi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Global solution, do you think Kyoto is the solution?
I think Kyoto is one of the solutions. What's happening here in COP17 is that we're discussing Kyoto, but there are several other things that we're also discussing. So Kyoto binds about 37 countries to cutting emissions, but within the rest of the discussion, it talks about the rest of the countries as well. So the US, who aren't part of Kyoto, who also need to cut emissions. But what's really important is, as well as cutting emissions, this COP is also about how do we support developing countries countries, people living in poverty in developing countries who are going to be hit hardest and fastest by climate change, to survive. So one of the key issues that should come out of Durban, that we need to come out of Durban, is how are developing countries going to support, how are developed countries going to support developing countries with the finance?
Green Climate Fund being one of them. How important is that being finalized here in Durban?
It is absolutely crucial that that is finalized. But that is just an institution. At the moment, the Green Climate Fund, if it gets set up, hopefully it will in Durban, it's empty. So there's no point having an institution to hold money when there's no money to go into it. So we're also saying that we need to put money into that fund. And one of the most promising ways to do that, we're saying it needs to come from developed countries, rich countries' budgets. But then the second way, a supplementary way that is additional to that, is that we're saying that there is a real chance in Durban to put forward a small tax on shipping fuels that could raise $10 billion a year for developing countries to adapt.
One of the issues your organization is dealing with is food security. In terms of climate change, how dire is the situation in terms of food security in Africa?
Listen, it's bad already, and it's getting worse because of climate change. We're speaking to people who are saying they're already struggling because their weather patterns are changing, the rains aren't coming, it's getting drier, they're not able to plant and they're not able to harvest. So that means that they aren't able to produce food, and this particularly impacts on women. In some developing countries, women produce about 80% of the food. Now, they're responsible for creating food, producing it, but they're also responsible for putting food on the table. So if they can't produce it, they need to go out and buy it. Climate change also leads to food price increases because the availability gets less and less because it's so difficult to grow. It also could increase prices. So there we have women who aren't able to grow, who aren't able to buy food. They're the ones that are going to go hungry first of all. And the implications on that for broader food security for all of us is really severe.
Rashmi Misri, thank you very much for your time. She's from Oxfam SA.
All right, that was Blaine Herman who caught up with Rashmi Misri from Oxfam South Africa, warning about the dangers that we're facing if we don't address climate change. Food prices are likely to hike. We've already been seeing that. I'm sure that all of you at home have been going shopping each month and finding that your favorite items have been increasing in price but steadily over time. And part of that cost has also been the import of the rise in energy costs, transport costs and things like that have really impacted on that. So big issues that are affecting us every single day, actually. All right, let's go back to the people space now, and Blaine is standing by there. Blaine?
We come to you from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Well, we never underestimate the power of music, and music is now being used as a tool in order to get the message of climate change off the ground. Menzi Mbonambi, he's from Men of the Past Collective. He joins me now. Menzi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What's your message? How do you use music to get that message across?
Thank you to be around here. We use music as a tool to communicate with the world, because somehow as artists we believe that we have a strong responsibility in our community and the whole nation that spread the message, because somehow the music is in the message and the message is in the music. So within our music there is a lot of words talking about the climate change and how people should be conscious, of what is happening around them. That's the whole purpose of the music.
Let's not waste any time. Let's hear some of the messages in this music. I'll ask you to start off. This is Menzi, and it's with his group called Men of the Past Collective. Let's take a listen now.
Blowing winds, moving clouds, changing weathers. Signs of the living God and the surety of the inevitable. Mankind still trying to understand that which they cannot. Time telling they already told. I hear the winds from the east, the sound of the roaring waves. The mind evolves to those who are devoted to understanding. Terrible timing and the texture of the teachings. Torture the ignorant. Blowing winds like the man blowing the dust. Cast them into the sea.
Well, there you go, enjoying the music of Menzi Mbonambi, who caught up with Blaine Herman a little bit earlier on. And yeah, people expressing themselves in very different ways here at the Climate Change Conference, but the message is all the same. We've all got to do our bit, focus our attention, and make sure that we find ways to save our planet. Well, Asanda is at Eco Park, I think, and she's got a message for us with somebody there. Asanda?
Well, Peter, where I am today is a dump site. Yes, it is a dump site. What this place is called is the Eco Park Bluff, but there's no bluffing about this. This place used to be a dump site right here in Durban, which has now been converted into an educational space, not only for children, as it's aimed at, but for how humans can impact the environment, recycling waste, basically, into something useful. What you see here is nice green leaves. There's also tires that have been used, not only for deco like you see here, but these walls here are walls of a place that looks like a guest house. It is practically a guest house. We went inside earlier. There's beds, linen, a beautiful place where you can come and spend a night with your kids to learn about how you can impact the environment as a human being. But somebody who knows more about it is Justin Vermaak. How do you convert a dump site like this into a beautiful eco park?
I think once we agree that we have to do something about the planet, everything comes naturally. So this facility here is designed to teach us about the impact we have when we travel. And we made a commitment to recycle 100,000 tires in this particular facility.
What are the tires used for? I see there are walls that are made and there's rooms to sleep in. But what other activities go on here?
Okay, this Ecodome is an educational facility. So there's 8 rooms. So it takes a classroom of children with their teachers, and we make it in your face to acknowledge the impact that we have.
Well, Justin, I hope more people from not only Durban, but those who come to visit Durban will come to see the Eco Park Bluff here, bring their children and help them learn about how to convert waste into a beautiful resource. Let's go back to Peter at the ICC.
Asanda, thank you very much indeed. And that's how we, in fact, come to the end of today's broadcast. Please make sure to join us again tomorrow at 10 to 10. From all of us, goodbye for today.